August 7, 1944, 5:12 a.m. The sun had yet to rise, and the hills of Mortain in northern France lay shrouded in mist, heavy with the quiet hum of dread. Below, in the valley, 3 American units, a pair of infantry platoons and a light artillery detachment, found themselves trapped like fish in a net. What they believed was a defensive pocket had transformed into a death trap. From 2 sides, German Panzer divisions were closing in. Machine gun fire shattered the fog, and the crackle of the radio carried one final order from headquarters. Hold your position. Do not engage. Reinforcements are on the way. Inside his M4 Sherman, Lieutenant Carl Hartman stared at the smoke shell in his hand. It wasn't meant to be fired, at least not without approval. The manual labeled it wasteful. Command called it unauthorized. But out there, his men were running out of time. If the Germans completed the encirclement, every one of them would be slaughtered or captured before the sun even rose. Hartman's heart hammered. He looked to his gunner. "Just one shot," he murmured. "That's all we need." And with that, without orders, without backup, without certainty, he pulled the trigger on the smoke round that could either end his career or save over 200 lives. Hartman, the engineer-turned-tank commander, was never meant for war. In 1939, if someone had asked him about his future, he would have spoken of bridges. A third-year engineering student at the University of Michigan, he obsessed over blueprints, captivated by the harmony of steel and concrete. In a letter to his father, he once wrote, "Designing a suspension bridge is like playing God, but with numbers and bolts." Then war arrived. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Hartman enlisted not out of patriotism or courage, but because doing nothing was unthinkable. He joined the Armored Corps, trusting machines more than men. By summer 1944, Hartman was in Normandy, France, weeks after D-Day. At 24, he commanded a Sherman tank attached to the 119th Infantry Regiment of the 30th Infantry Division, Old Hickory. They were pushing German forces back toward Paris, but the enemy wasn't ready to yield. In early August, Field Marshal Gunther von Lugge launched Operation Lut, a surprise counterattack aimed at cutting through American lines, recapturing the town of Avanches, and trapping Allied forces in Normandy. Mortain, a sleepy hillside town with roads radiating in 5 directions, became the focal point. The Germans were desperate but dangerous. Their air power had dwindled, fuel was scarce, and their armored divisions had thinned to a few elite units, including the feared 2nd ESS Panzer Division, Das Reich, and the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division Guts von Bollingen. The Americans' fragile front near Mortain consisted of 3 units: Hartman's tank crew, a platoon from Company K, and a forward artillery observer team, all tasked with holding a ridge southwest of the town. Orders were simple: hold and wait. Reinforcements were expected within 24 hours, but war waits for no one. By the night of August 6th, under darkness and thick fog, German armor advanced. By early morning, the Americans realized they were no longer on the high ground. They were trapped in a pocket, slowly being encircled. Radios buzzed with panic. German tanks cut the western road, infantry advanced from the south, and artillery hammered any attempt to reposition. There was no escape, only the suffocating sense that everything had gone terribly wrong. Inside the Sherman, Hartman worked to keep his crew calm. Earl Bishop, a quiet farm boy from Iowa, at the gun. Corporal James Ortega, a poker-playing explosives expert, as loader. Anthony Tony Vitelli, a Brooklyn daredevil, driving. And Private George Marks, 19, barely speaking for 2 days, manning the radio. They were not heroes, just 5 young men and 33 tons of steel, armed with a 75mm gun and a handful of shells, including 1 forbidden round, a single white phosphorus smoke shell, reserved for emergencies or marking enemy positions. Weeks earlier, Hartman had told them, "If we ever need to bend the rules, that's the time." The time had come. German armor moved faster than intelligence predicted. Command had gone silent for 10 minutes. The only directive Hartman had received: do not engage unless fired upon. Hold your ground. But that ground was shrinking by the second. American infantry began retreating toward the Sherman, wounded and desperate. One carried another on his back, all headed toward a road that no longer existed. Hartman's hand hovered over the smoke shell. Firing it would break protocol, but doing nothing would mean certain death. By 5:30 a.m., the valley's fog shifted, yet visibility remained under 200 yards. Trees loomed like specters, shadows moved unnaturally. Every crunch of gravel mimicked tank tracks. Company K's men were positioned south of Hartman, clinging to survival, and the Sherman's crew knew it might be up to them to save the day. The ridge's single exposed flank had been found. Under cover of night, a German recon unit had slipped through a gap and pushed faster than anyone expected. Within half an hour, they seized the western road, sealing the Americans' only natural escape. Mortain had stopped being a forward position, now it was a trap. Inside the Sherman, the radio spat chaos. A forward observer cried out, "We're taking hits from the south. Multiple vehicles need fire support." Another voice cut in, breathless. "They're in the tree line. Repeat. They're in the trees." Command's reply was disturbingly calm. Negative on fire support. High risk of friendly fire. Maintain position.
Renforcement en route.
Hartman killed the volume and peered through the periscope. Movement in the treeline, short, squat silhouettes. Panzer IVs at 2 o'clock, he reported. 3, maybe 4, closing fast. Earl Bishop swung the turret. Ortega had the next armor-piercing round cued. "Do we fire?" Ortega asked. Hartman's reply died on his lips, until the first German shell hit the artillery observers 200 yards south. Fire screamed up. Men screamed with it. The fight had started. "Return fire," Hartman roared. The Sherman's 75 mm answered. One Panzer erupted, immolated. The other scattered and shot back. The hull rocked. Dirt and shrapnel peppered the tank. The radio crackled with a runner. "Command has lost contact with the 1st Battalion. Mortain is compromised. Withdraw to phase line red. Repeat. Fall back." Hartman went cold. Phase line red led west, down the road the Germans now held. "They're telling us to retreat down a road that doesn't exist anymore," Tony muttered. Outside, American infantry were already collapsing into disorder. Clusters of men dragging the wounded, no formation, no command, just a slow-motion route through fog and gunfire. German squads sloped up the south slope. Machine guns chewed holes in their ranks. Hartman watched the southern approach tighten. 10 minutes, maybe less, and the enemy would close the southern pincer. The encirclement would be complete. No one on the ridge would escape. His eyes tracked the smoke from the burning Panzer. It drifted west, toward German lines, slow, steady, ignorant of orders. "Ortega," Hartman said, "you still have that smoke round?" The phosphorus one. The corporal hesitated. Its use was forbidden, a last resort nightmare. "Yes, sir. We're not authorized to use it." Hartman turned to the crew. "We're buying them a chance. One shot. West. Create a wall of smoke. If they hesitate for a minute, we get those men out." Tony raised an eyebrow. "And if they don't hesitate?" Hartman met him steadily. "Then we buy time, nothing more." Ortega nodded and rammed the white phosphorus shell home. Bishop adjusted elevation. Hartman cracked the hatch and scanned. Wounded crawling, radios and ammo crates abandoned, steel tracks closing like a zipper. He whispered to himself, "Let's make some noise." The decision was reckless and official policy forbade it. White phosphorus was a savage tool. Meant to mask movement or mark targets, it burned fiercely, spread unpredictably, and did not care for friend or foe. In the wrong wind, it could become a weapon of chaos or worse. Hartman knew the risks, and yet, with German armor closing in and the cries of wounded men echoing across the ridge, there was only one thing he could see: time slipping away. "Fire!" he ordered. Bishop hesitated for just a heartbeat. Then the Sherman's gun roared. The white phosphorus shell screamed out, detonating midair 50 yards west. Within seconds, thick gray smoke poured across the field, a wall of chaos descending like a theater curtain. The wind, mercifully steady, carried it directly toward the German approach. The battlefield changed instantly. Tanks halted, infantry froze, blind in the sudden opacity. American soldiers vanished from view, their movements now invisible. "Move!" Hartman shouted into the radio. "All units west. Use the smoke. Go!" On the ridge, scattered infantry leapt from cover. Medics grabbed stretchers. Artillery crews abandoned guns, clutching rifles and dragging each other through the haze. Some carried the wounded. Others ran for survival. Inside the Sherman, Hartman rotated the turret slightly. "If they fire through it, we hit them back," he said. "Only if they fire first. Keep the illusion." "What illusion?" Ortega asked. "That we planned this," Hartman replied grimly. From the German perspective, the world had gone dark. Smoke appeared out of nowhere as American forces vanished. Alarms rang. Some German commanders feared a counterattack. Others suspected incoming artillery or air strikes. In truth, it was 5 men inside a tank gambling on wind and fear. For 90 seconds, nothing moved. And in that 90 seconds, nearly 200 American soldiers slipped through the smoke, disappearing to the rear line. Hartman watched like a surgeon observing a procedure, noting every helmet that popped up and disappeared behind the gray curtain. Silence reigned. No shots, no movement. Even the Sherman seemed to hold its breath. Then suddenly a staccato of gunfire. A German machine gun opened on the left flank, spraying into the smoke. Another joined in. A Panzer fired blindly into the fog. "Return fire. Suppression only," Hartman snapped. "Hit near the flashes. Make them think we're still dug in." Bishop obeyed, the Sherman's 75 mm barking a high-explosive round into a thicket where muzzle flashes flickered. Fire and smoke erupted, feeding chaos. The Germans paused again, hesitant to advance into what could be a trap. Behind the smoke, nearly 200 American soldiers vanished to safety. The gamble had worked. Hartman exhaled for the first time in hours. Sweat poured down his neck, fingers trembling. The crew was silent. "You think command's gonna like what we just did?" Vitelli finally asked. Hartman didn't answer immediately. Then he smiled, tight-lipped and exhausted. "I think command will like that we're alive. Everyone move." First, no one moved. The smoke rolled across the field like a living thing, swallowing everything. Some soldiers feared a trap, too convenient, too sudden. Others saw hope wrapped in gray. Then someone yelled, "They're covering us. Move." That was all it took. The ridge erupted. Infantry sprinted west into the fog, limping, carrying the wounded, abandoning gear that slowed them down. The smoke was thick, acrid, burning lungs, but it gave them one thing they hadn't felt since dawn: a chance. One by one, squads slipped into the veil. What had been a frozen, scattered retreat became a coordinated exodus. And Hartman's Sherman sat at the edge, the last visible guardian before the void. "Keep the turret rotating," Hartman ordered. "Make them think we're covering everyone." "Ammo count?" Ortega asked. "For armor piercing, 2 high explosive, 0 smoke," Bishop replied. "Enough bluff to look dangerous," Hartman said. Through the tank's periscope, visibility was now barely 20 yards. Shadows flickered, running men, limping figures, stretchers. The Germans still held their positions. Officers hesitated, uncertain. Was it a counterattack? Booby traps? Indirect fire? No one wanted to be the first to charge blindly into the smoke. The pause saved lives. A group of artillery spotters passed the Sherman, coughing, shielding their faces. One banged the tank side. "Nice trick, boys. You just bought us our skins." Hartman didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the map in his lap, calculating fallback lines, if any still existed. More groups followed, emerging from the gray, alive because of a single forbidden gamble. The men moved in silence. Others whispered prayers, curses, or the names of comrades lost just minutes before. Last came a squad from Company K, moving slowly, carrying 2 badly wounded on makeshift stretchers. One man waved frantically at Hartman. "They're closing in. You have to go now." Hartman nodded, waiting just long enough to see the final soldier disappear into the mist. "Tony," he said to his driver, "punch it. We're the last ones out." The Sherman lurched forward, treads crunching gravel and soft earth, pushing west into the smoke trail they had created. Hartman kept the hatch cracked, scanning silhouettes, enemy or friendly. Suddenly, a flash. A German machine gun opened fire from the right flank, blindly spraying into the haze. Bullets pinged off the Sherman's hull. The tank rocked. Hartman ducked instinctively. "Return fire. Suppression only," he snapped. Bishop spun the turret and fired a high-explosive shell into the source of the noise. It struck the treeline, lighting up the smoke for a fleeting second before the gray curtain closed again. Silence returned. They pressed on, passing burnt-out jeeps, abandoned helmets, and scattered rifles. The battlefield a moving graveyard. 3 minutes later, the edge of the smoke came into view. The first rays of morning sunlight pierced the eastern fog, revealing the American fallback line. Dozens of men huddled behind trucks, sandbags, and makeshift barricades. Medics rushed among the wounded. Officers barked into radios. Someone was setting up a Browning machine gun. It wasn't beautiful, but it was safety. As the Sherman crested the hill, a cheer erupted. They had made it. Tanks still rolling. Hartman raised a hand from his hatch, a half salute, half wave. Behind them, the smoke continued to billow, buying precious seconds for the last stragglers. Soldiers emerged, coughing, bleeding, but alive. The encirclement had failed. The Germans had hesitated, and in that pause nearly 200 Americans had slipped away. All because of one shot, one forbidden shell. Inside the Sherman, Ortega finally exhaled. "Next time someone calls smoke rounds useless, I'm punching them." Vitelli laughed. "Next time someone says we're out of options, I'm saying, wait for the wind." Hartman said nothing, just watched the smoke trail fade behind them. Survival and success. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating a battlefield scarred like the aftermath of a storm. Scattered equipment, scorched earth, splintered trees. And yet, through that ruin, nearly 200 soldiers had survived. The Sherman rolled to a stop behind a hastily constructed sandbag line. A medic rushed over to check the crew, but Hartman waved him off. "We're fine. Check the others first." Around him, survivors slumped to the ground, coughing, drinking water, or sitting in stunned silence. Some wept. No one spoke much. They all knew how close they had come. A lieutenant from Company K approached, his face streaked with dirt and smoke. "Lieutenant Hartman," he said. Hartman stood, brushing ash from his uniform. "You bought us time we didn't have. I don't know what that was, but it worked." Hartman shook his hand. "It was just smoke." The man smiled bitterly. "Best damn smoke I've ever seen." Back at regimental headquarters, initial reports were chaos. Units out of position, communications down, enemy strength underestimated. Mortain seemed destined to be recorded as a disaster, a costly tactical error in an otherwise advancing front. Then came the messages from survivors. Not just that they had escaped, but how a single tank, against orders, had deployed a white phosphorus smoke shell to mask a retreat. The act delayed German armor, disrupted enemy coordination, and preserved 2 infantry platoons and a forward artillery team. No officers were killed, only 14 wounded. Dozens of lives saved. Some called it a miracle, but miracles without orders rarely pleased command. By afternoon, Hartman and his crew were summoned to a mobile command post. The mood was formal, tense. Colonel Raymond Sloan, a strict, by-the-book officer, did not waste time. "You deployed white phosphorus against protocol," he said, flipping through a clipboard. "No authorization, no prior clearance, no confirmation of air or artillery coordination. That is a direct violation of standing engagement rules." Hartman stood at attention. "Yes, sir. I take full responsibility." Sloan peered over his glasses. "Do you have any idea what could have happened if the wind had shifted?" "Yes, sir. We would have died anyway," Hartman replied. Silence fell. Then Major Aniston, operations officer of the 30th Division, spoke quietly. "Sir, they saved 192 personnel, including all 3 forward observers. Without that smoke, we'd be retrieving bodies today." Sloan looked down at the report. He didn't smile, but he also didn't argue. "You'll receive a formal review," the officer told Hartman, "but unofficially well done." That was it. No medal, no ceremony. Just the quiet acknowledgement that something had gone right. In the days that followed, the battle for Mortain continued. The Germans failed to retake the ridges. Their counterattack stalled. Allied air superiority returned once the weather cleared, and American forces pushed east again. The smoke on that hill became just a footnote in the larger campaign, but to the men who had lived because of it, it was everything. A week later, a chaplain held a small, impromptu service near a cluster of apple trees outside Mortain. No crosses, no speeches, just a gathering of survivors. Hartman said little that day. He stood with his crew listening. When someone asked how he had come up with the smoke idea, he simply shrugged. "Sometimes you get one shot," he said. "The trick is knowing when to pull the trigger." The formal review came 5 days later. It was held inside a requisition schoolhouse, serving as a temporary divisional headquarters. Windows were shattered from artillery shelling, and the air smelled faintly of damp chalk and diesel. Hartman arrived in a clean uniform, boots polished, eyes straight ahead. He did not bring his crew. They had not been summoned. This was about one man and one decision. The board consisted of 3 officers, a logistics major, a legal advisor, and a combat veteran from another division. The tone was strictly procedural. They asked Hartman to recount in exact detail the events of the morning of August 7th, enemy positioning, wind direction, terrain conditions, proximity of friendly units, and, of course, why he had deployed a forbidden white phosphorus round. Hartman told them everything plainly, without embellishment or apology. "I believed the smoke would delay the enemy long enough for our people to escape," he concluded. And it did. A long pause followed. The legal officer spoke first. "Lieutenant Hartman, are you aware that in other circumstances, the unauthorized use of white phosphorus could be grounds for disciplinary action?" "Yes, sir. Fully aware," Hartman replied. The logistics major added, "Do you understand the risks you placed on units downwind, including potential friendly casualties if the wind shifted?" "Yes, sir." Finally, the combat veteran leaned forward. His uniform bore a silver star. He had fought at Salerno, Sicily, and Anzio. "I read every after-action report," he said. "You knew the risks and you still made the call. You gambled and you won." Hartman said nothing. The veteran continued, "That takes more than guts. That takes judgment." He turned to the others.
Ira cum men no repriman.
There was no objection. The final report stated, Lieutenant Carl Hartman acted outside standard protocol, but in accordance with battlefield necessity and sound tactical judgment. No disciplinary action recommended. Unofficially, word spread fast. Within a week, officers from 3 different units requested after-action briefings from Hartman. They wanted to know exactly how he judged the wind, calculated the smoke spread, and determined its duration. A decision once considered reckless was now being studied. By early September, a quiet directive circulated among armored units. In certain circumstances, smoke deployment could be authorized at the discretion of field commanders if it increased the likelihood of unit survival. The rules had changed slightly but significantly. Hartman and his crew were rotated out of the Mortain sector and reassigned to support operations closer to the German border. They would go on to fight in the Hurtgen Forest and later in the Battle of the Bulge, and survive both. In November, Hartman received a small envelope with a typed notice. He had been awarded the Bronze Star for meritorious service in direct support of combat operations. There was no ceremony, no photographer. The medal was handed to him at a quartermaster's desk, along with a form to sign. Hartman stared at the box for a long moment, the weight of that small piece of metal heavier than any gun, any shell, or any battle he had faced. Before placing it in his duffel, Hartman glanced at the small white phosphorus shell one last time. Later that night, Ortega asked, "You gonna tell your folks back home about it?" Hartman shrugged. "They'd probably ask what took me so long." Vitelli chuckled. "Think they'll put your smoke trick in the manuals someday?" Hartman let a faint grin cross his face. "Maybe, but I hope no one ever has to use it again." It wasn't the kind of glory that made headlines.
No parades, no photographs.
But among the men who had walked through that gray curtain and survived, Hartman's name became more than a rank. It became a symbol of trust. And in war, trust was rarer than metals. Strategy, lessons, and legacy. Historians would later describe the Battle of Mortain not for its scale, but for what it revealed. On paper, the German counterattack during Operation Lüttich was bold. Over 100 armored vehicles, including elite SS Panzer divisions, aiming to drive west to Avanches and split the Allied front. Success would have stalled the post-D-Day momentum entirely, but they failed. And while air power and coordinated Allied defenses played a massive role, small, unexpected moments mattered too. Moments like what happened on the ridge outside Mortain on August 7, 1944. Military analysts later noted the psychological impact of Hartman's smoke deployment. The German infantry commander leading the assault recorded in his field log, "Visibility ceased. Enemy positions unclear. Feared ambush under chemical screen. Ordered temporary halt of advance." That temporary halt lasted almost 12 minutes. In that time, the Americans escaped. 12 minutes changed everything. From a strategic perspective, the incident reinforced a truth as old as warfare itself. Information and perception matter as much as firepower. The Germans, though better equipped and more experienced, hesitated because they could not see beyond the smoke. In war, hesitation is a silent killer, and in this case, it saved lives. Hartman's action sparked a quiet shift in doctrine. Armored training schools began to teach soldiers to view smoke not only as a last resort tool but as a tactical asset, used with timing, terrain, and weather, a force multiplier. Subtle but lasting. Outside the military sphere, the story never gained headlines. No newsreels, no articles. Yet for the men who lived through it, that moment remained sharp. Private First Class Harold Jensen, a wounded infantryman, wrote to his wife, "I don't know the guy in the tank who fired that smoke round, but I know this. I owe him everything. We all do." That letter now rests in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Corporal Elias Ford later wrote a short memoir. One chapter, "The Wall of Smoke," begins, "We were dead men walking. Then the world turned gray, and through that gray, we found our way home." For Hartman, the legacy was quieter. After the war, he declined an offer to remain in the military. He returned to the University of Michigan, finished his engineering degree, and took a job designing vehicle safety systems for a Detroit auto company. Ironically, the man who once bent the rules to save soldiers with smoke went on to create innovations that saved thousands of lives in car accidents. He rarely spoke of the war. When his children asked, he said simply, "Loud, fast, and full of choices you don't get to make twice." Yet in the back of his closet, a yellowed file marked AR Morton Ridge engagement remained. Inside, a map, a crew photo, and a single polished shell casing. Years later, at 62, retired and reflecting on a quiet life, Hartman wrote a letter to his younger sister. between memories of childhood summers and car engines. He included a passage no one had ever heard. August 7th, 1944. I can still smell the smoke. Not the burning kind, the kind that hides you, that wraps around you like a second chance. I wasn't supposed to use it. We were supposed to hold the line, follow orders, die if needed. But seeing those men out there, scared, bleeding, still helping each other, I just couldn't let them die for protocol. That day, the battlefield taught me something no manual ever could. Sometimes the only right choice is the one they didn't teach you to make. The letter was discovered years after his passing. His family donated it to the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where it now sits in a display titled Split-Second Decisions. Tactical Genius in the Field. There are no statues of Carl Hartman, no documentaries, no best-selling memoirs. Yet somewhere in a quiet archive rests the testimony of a man who changed the course of a battle with a single, unauthorized act of judgment. And maybe that is the real lesson. History doesn't always remember you for what you were ordered to do, but for what you chose to do when no one else would.